So, the paleo diet. The idea behind this diet, it's obviously not a diet that's going to pay much attention to how much you eat, right? We just talked about how that wasn't really the thing. Now, that's a little bit of a cheat because what happens is, in the paleo diet, you're eating foods that, such high quality foods, that it's almost impossible to overeat them. Because one of the sort of hallmarks and salient features of a good food is that it doesn't have any calories in it, right? So broccoli, for instance, like you could eat a bushel full of broccoli and there's just not many calories in it, but it takes up a lot of space in your stomach. Does that make sense? So it becomes, the better quality food you're eating, more and more difficult to overeat before you're just stuffed. Does that make sense? Now you could, I've before always admitted that I once unconsciously ate a sleeve of Ritz crackers during a commercial break and blamed the men I was working with for eating them. And they were like, dude, you just ate all of those in like a 3-minute commercial break, a whole sleeve. Those are calorically dense, right? You can easily put a sleeve of Ritz crackers in your belly if you're a grown man and not even feel it, right? Not even blink. So, the paleo diet does monitor food amount, but in a very indirect way. You're not going to be counting calories or anything like that, but the bottom line is that I'm going to dare you to get fat eating tuna fish and broccoli. You just can't. You'd have to just devote yourself, become a professional eater, stretch your stomach out with water and do all these things to actually get enough of it in you to get fat. So the quality, not the quantity, is going to be the angle we're taking, but the two do inform one another, right? So there is eventually kind of there's a crossover there. So the paleo diet is this sort of, it's a model of eating that arises from this idea that we genetically are much older creatures than the agrarian culture. So the agrarian lifestyle started, people began to domesticate animals and, plant grains and stuff about 10,000 years ago. And the theory is that there were a lot of humans before that lived and were selected to survive and thrive on non-agrarian foods, right? Hunter-gatherer foods. I always stop at this point here and say it is not requisite that you believe in the theory of evolution to follow this diet. The fact is that even if you just go back 150 years, not even 10,000 years, what you'll find is that your grandparents ate very different diets from you. And they were diets that were more comprised of meat, fruits, and vegetables, right? And so even if you don't want to believe in millions of years of selective, evolutionary process guiding us to eat those foods, you could at least agree to believe in 10,000 years of that process because it would happen the same. Does that make sense? So you can believe this is like really deep down millions of years old, or you can believe it's 10,000 years old, and it really doesn't make a hill of beans difference as to whether or not the theory kind of piles up. But the idea essentially was that because our ancestors ate meat and fruits and vegetables primarily, that those offspring that survived best and thrived best on those foods were the ones that lived and went forward, right? And they then passed those genes to still other kids that did even better on those foods. And that if there was like a genetic mutation in a kid that was born, 700 years ago who would have thrived on Oreos and Kool-Aid, he didn't survive, right? I mean, that guy could have been around. I'm open to that. But there wasn't enough Oreos and Kool-Aid around for him to survive to pass those awesome genes along, So that's the basic kind of principle and the idea. Now, what are agrarian foods? What is in and what is out? It's kind of always what people want me to know. There's a neat algorithm on the board out here if you want to look at it that is pretty thorough. And it's the first question on it is does it have a face? And if the answer is yes, then you can eat it. It's kind of silly, but it actually works really well. But basically the easiest thing is tell you what you can eat, and then we'll kind of nitpick at the things that are kind of out on that. But it's essentially meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds. Now, this is probably the most important part of the whole night, right here. If I were to draw this spectrum here, this kind of timeline with the worst foods and the best foods. And we're gonna say kale, just because I don't like it. Is it spelled with a K?
Yeah.
Oh, I got it right. Really good, all right? And then down here we're gonna put like arsenic and funnel cakes. Those are pretty close. I actually make a pretty good argument that there's nothing redemptive about a funnel cake. Like there are some foods that it's like a Twinkie. It's like, well, it's got some fats in it. You could use the fats. Funnel cakes are useless. Worst foods and best foods. And we're going to draw this line here, all right? And on this side is going to be the paleo permissible stuff, and this side's going to be the off-limits stuff, all right? It's really important to understand that there's lots of foods right here that are just barely paleo. In other words, yes, they fit in to the framework, but you know, like raisins, what's another one here? Do what? Potatoes, a good one. We'll come back to those. Guy who eats meats and kale, and he walks, he's like, I'm a paleo, and he'd be like, wow, look at you, you are, I can tell. And then I can have a guy come in here and be like, I'm paleo. He says the same thing, and it's like he eats stinking raisins, honey, and white potatoes. Vastly different diets, right? And this is one beef I have with the paleo diet, is that there's not really any, we do these paleo challenges and some people have this tremendous result and some people don't. It's because some people were trying to see how well they could game the paleo diet to eat sweet stuff. And some people were like, hey, let's eat the good paleo foods instead of the bad paleo foods. So it's not like you're home free once you cross this line. Does that make sense? There's always better and worse. And same over here. There's like peanuts, right? Peanuts aren't paleo, they're legumes, right? So they're not really nuts, and they're out. But they're only probably marginally worse for you than raisins, maybe better for you than raisins in a lot of ways. So there's this gray area. My whole thing is if you want fast, dramatic, quick results, just kind of stay out of the confluence of the gray area. Does that make sense? Definitely don't eat funnel cakes and arsenic. But when you get kind of close right here, be careful there. And then when you get to the good part, the bad good foods, use them in moderation also. Does that make sense? So that's been a big frustration for a lot of people. They're like, I'm eating paleo, I don't understand. I say, well, give me a food journal. I look at it and it's agave nectar and tequila. And it's like, well, sort of, but not really. All right, so what not to eat. And then we've got to get around to talking about how in the world do I live life not eating that, especially for those of you with kids. Meat, vegetables, fruit, nuts, and seeds. And let me back up and say, and eat these things basically in the order, and I do like the paleo kind of framework in this way, that because it gives you some guidance. Eat them with preference as to how available they would be in nature, right? So it's like if I said, hey, go get some meat. Everybody come back in an hour with some meat. Most of you would come back probably with like fish, right? It'd be the easiest to find and the least likely to kill you in the process of getting it, right?
You hadn't been with the fish, I've
And freshwater, probably freshwater fish.
Okay.
But and then next maybe some small game. You might come out with some birds, some chickens, that sort of thing. And then you got hard up, you might come back with, some venison or, some red meat. And if you came back with a boar, I would be like, wow, you were hurting for some food. If you went after that thing, because they are mean. And it's the same that same evolutionary kind of idea is that we thrived on the foods that were the most available, right? Not just the foods that were around, there was actually a pecking order. Same with vegetables and fruits. These are your carbohydrates. Protein, fats. The carbohydrates in the paleo diet, in the order that they would appear in nature, right? It's not strawberries, right? Because strawberries are seasonal. They spoil in a heartbeat. They're only regionally found, right? It's dark leafy greens. So I said, hey, y'all come back and bring me some edible vegetation. You'd all come back with just some funky old dark leafy greens. Right, and we would try and season them somehow. We could stomach them, but that's what you would find first. You wouldn't come back with like razzleberries. But if I said, okay, you can't buy almonds in a store, you have to go shake a tree, and then like hull them, and like if you imagine the natural process of eating nuts and seeds, they're always a pain in the rear, right? Peanut butter is like, it's like mainlining peanut butter, right? Opening peanuts. Have you ever tried to open peanuts? See how long it takes you to make a peanut butter sandwich with a peanut if you sit there and open the peanuts. You'll burn more calories messing with the shells than you'll get to eat, right? So again, let the natural way, not the store-bought way, kind of inform whether or not you should be eating more or less of that particular food. Does that make sense? All right. So what is off is dairy, grains, sugar, of course, and then a bunch of silly stuff, legumes, and there's a lot of this gray area stuff. But these are the main three I really want to hit on right here. Now this does include, milk and yogurt and everything else. But remember the little line we drew, funnel cakes, kale, paleo, and this is dairy. You've got, chocolate milk down here, and then like whole organic milk, like right here, and then you got Greek yogurt, which is like, man, it's trying to come on over. It's great. It's good food. It's good for my kids survive on it, But again, it's always the better and worse with dairy, right? A good real butter, like churned by a Mennonite butter, is even better. Something that makes it special. Way down here, there's great stuff in butter. So always with better or worse on that. Don't just think I'm saying all dairy's bad. I'm not. Some's better than others. Grains. So this is a big one here, and a lot of times when I get to this is when I get fiber. Thing one is that if you're going to eat the amount of fruits and vegetables I'm going to tell you about, fiber is, you're probably going to want to step off a little bit on the fiber. You're going to get way more in this than you are right here. So don't worry about the fibers, but you can't take out grains from your diet without adding in fruits and vegetables in the place, right? Because then you just get locked up, right? It'll shut down. It'll be like Atkins diet basically at that point. So you are swapping these two, not just, because most people that I know that are eating a lot of grains don't eat hardly any fruits and vegetables at all, and this is their primary carbohydrate source. And so if you just quit grains, you're going to feel terrible, right? You've got to flip them around. You've got to flip them around. So no dairy, no grains, and then sugar. And this one right here, I think most of you know. I don't have to make a big argument against sugar, but be cognizant of where it's at. And when I first gave up sugar cold turkey and did it for 12 weeks, the first 3 weeks it kept sneaking up on me. Like I was really trying not to eat sugar, but I'd eat something and be like, does this have sugar in it? Like mustard, like stuff you would just never think had sugar in it. And I'd look at the back and it was like, oh, sugar. I was at the time relatively poor, and so I would go to McDonald's and you remember they had 25-cent cheeseburger nights? You remember this? And I would throw out the buns and I'd eat just the meat and the cheese. And actually since found out that they actually put granulated white sugar in their meat. It was in the meat I was eating. So, which is why your kids prefer McDonald's. But anyway, we all know it's bad, but be especially watchful about where all it's at. You'll find that it's kind of all over the place. Yes?
Just talking about white sugar, because
no.
Fruit and vegetables.
Good question. Yes, I'm talking. Yeah, the sugar that comes out of these natural sources right here is what we want. Carbohydrates are sugars, so I'm saying you ought to eat sugar, but from fruit and vegetable sources. Yeah, good. I'm glad you helped me clarify that. What I don't want is definitely refined white sugar is the worst, but any sort of added sugar that wasn't kind of part of that. And again, we get to this better or worse scenario. I always have somebody say, well, I know, there's confectioner's sugar and granulated, and they say, but I eat this, agave nectar harvested by Sherpas in the mountains of, it's always some exotic, there's a new one every week, and they think that that's going to be the one that is okay, and it's not. It's just the one closer to heat down here, right? Like honey, it's a great example of that. Think about the availability. Like, yes, technically, honey, I guess, would be paleo, but you have to go, and if you're going to eat it, you have to go to a bee's hive, and you have to stick your hand in it and get out what you're going to eat. How much honey would you have in your diets if that was really, if you couldn't have a store? So, be reasonable about that sort of stuff. No, obviously you can't avoid all sugar. You need it to survive. All right. So if that's the goal, to eat these foods and to purge everything else out of our diet, the next big question is what are the means by which we're going to achieve that goal? And this is really the hard part. There's two kind of ways and two kinds of people. There's cold turkey people and there's processed people. And I'm a cold turkey person and have only recently become softened toward the plight of the processed people, right? And realize that I need to be sensitive towards that kind of, I've always just like, just don't eat that stuff. Starting tomorrow, y'all don't eat that. What? And realize that's not going to work. So what we do here, we started it last 2 weeks. Last week, this is the second week, we have this Life by the Inch initiative. And basically every 2 weeks, I name a new food item that you just take it out of your diet. So it's just one thing at a time. Next week, it's probably going to be milk, not yogurt, not cheese, not sour cream. It's not all dairy. You're just taking little small bites. This last week it was Diet Cokes, which was the worst one for me, and so I just put it up first because that's still kind of my hang up. But you kind of and you don't have to follow ours. You can do it yourself and order them how you think you'll be most successful with. But just pick an item that you feel like you can move forward without, and then once that's no longer an issue, pick another one. And it's life by the inch is a cinch. Life by the yard is hard, right? So that's one way. Now the problem that I have with that kind of process is it doesn't give you the perspective on what you're really trying to achieve. And so in the past, I've always encouraged people to try the cold turkey for this reason. How many of you have ever gone let's say 8 weeks, we'll keep it short, 8 weeks of your entire life without eating any sugar, grains, or dairy products? Just one, and because she's already eats the Paleo Diet. maybe close on the Atkins, but probably not for 8 weeks, and you probably felt terrible because you weren't eating the fruits and vegetables so much.
I did feel like crap.
Yeah, that's not surprising. And I'll come back to the Atkins, but my point in asking that is that if you grew up in America, I kind of know that you haven't done that. It would be almost impossible to have figured that out. And so my whole point is, you don't know what it feels like to not do that. And it's really difficult, I think, to continue to fight a battle if you don't know what the prize is. Does that make sense? And so for me, the experience I had of just cutting it all out for 12 weeks, I felt so different and so good that it wasn't like, when's my next cheat night? I didn't want to cheat because then I would feel terrible, and I didn't want to feel that way again. Does that make sense? It wasn't that I was just going to eat this way because this was the rule, right? This is what I set out to do this. I'm going to be disciplined. It was that for about 8 weeks, and then after 8 weeks, it was like, well, I'm going to keep doing this because it feels so good. You'll see how it shifts. All of a sudden, the motivation changes from I'm going to be a good soldier and eat right and follow this diet to, I would go, people would say, have some cake, and I'm like, no, I'm okay. And they're like, oh, come on, you deserve it. You've been working hard. You look great. And it's like, no, I don't want to feel the way that's going to make me feel, right? Your body begins to recognize it as kind of poison. And there's a perspective that comes around. The other big perspective I got was that things like broccoli, and grapes and stuff that I didn't really like before, all of a sudden just tasted amazing. And it was because you sort of have this sort of, if you eat Skittles, grapes kind of taste like this, right? But if you don't eat any of that stuff, all of a sudden grapes are like Skittles. Like it just sort of readjusts. And my kids are a great example of this. At the pool in the summertime, they're there stinging, eating just dry, raw broccoli. And the other kids are like, ooh, that's gross. And my kids are like, no, I like this. And the reason why is because it tastes different to my kids than it does to other kids because of the full picture. So it's you kind of have to make your personal decision about how you're going to approach this. If you're going to do it kind of cold turkey and try and really experience that rapid change in the way you feel. If you do the life by the inch kind of method, you'll get that, but it'll be very gradual, and it's not going to be this night and day. Like, you'll have to remember, gosh, 6 months ago, how did I feel versus the way I feel now? You see what I'm saying? It'll be hard to kind of get that stark black and white contrast, and that stark black and white contrast is what keeps me motivated to stay in between the lines. So there's pros and cons to both. I put them both out there, and we'll talk more about strategies to help you get those later on. But the biggest thing going forward is that regardless of which one you take, you've got to have a respect for the scale of change with which you're undertaking. I think there's a sense in which a lot of people think changing your diet is sort of like changing your style, you know, and I'll always use the metaphor, you know, I could say, on Monday we're going to wake up and we're going to be preppy. On Monday we're all going to turn to preps, and we could all go to the Gap and buy some preppy clothes, you know, and learn some preppy things to say and some preppy restaurants to go to, and get up and hit it Monday morning and all pull it off and convince perfect strangers that we're preppy people. But if I said, all right, starting on Monday morning we're all going to be Jewish, right? And none of us in here are Jewish right now, for the purposes of the discussion. Then you could do the same things. You could go buy some Jewish clothes and learn some Jewish things to say, and you know, do all those things, and then Monday morning start trying to be Jewish. But you wouldn't be Jewish, right? And you would be terrible at it. It's the scale of change there is enormous, right? You're changing the whole fabric of your existence and everything you've always believed into something different over here. That's going to take some time. It's not like buying new clothes, right? Well, that's the way your diet is. Like, whether you know it or not, the reason why you crave certain things or want to eat and eat the amount and the type of foods that you do is because of this huge network of experiences and people and everything in your life up till now. And to reprogram that is a large scale sort of change. And if you don't go into it with the recognition of the fact that this is a big deal, then when you do fail, you'll get discouraged. Because if I said, hey, what's going to be preppy, and Monday morning you woke up and you forgot to put on your preppy clothes, it would be like, oh, I forgot. How could I? It was so simple. Like, that would be a massive failure in the face of the scope of the change, right? But if I said, let's be Jewish, and you accidentally, you know, did something Christian on that day, you know, then it would kind of be like, well, this is understandable because I've been a Christian for the past 40 years and now I'm trying to be Jewish. You see what I'm saying? All of a sudden you have a much higher tolerance for deviating from your goal. Does that make sense? It's all about kind of perspective. So understand the scale of change going into it, and that's going to help you be successful. And the other thing is, when you do mess up, you just have to correct. I'll always talk about these rumble strips on the highway because they scare me to death. You know, you get off the road and you're like, oh, I was running off the road, and you pull back in the center. In a diet, what most people do is they hit the rumble strip, like they get out from between the lines and they're like, oh, I'm out, I got off track, and they just roll their car over into the woods and just forget it. I got outside the yellow line, I might as well just wreck. That's what people do with their diets. It's insane. It doesn't make any sense. But I want you to think about that rumble strip. You know, when you hit that birthday party, you know, you take your kids to a birthday party and you eat the pizza and Coke and ice cream and it's like, then the next day it's just, you just pull back in the lines. That's the reasonable thing to do when you get a little bit off course, not rolling over into the woods. You'll still roll over in the woods sometimes, you know, everybody does, but don't intentionally just lose that. Again, that goes back to just understanding the scale of change and being, you know, sensitive towards that. That's the meat and potatoes, no pun intended, what I want to talk about. There's a lot of information that is sort of accessory to this, like I'll talk a little bit about supplements,